Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Virtue and Virtuosity. And I'm lucky enough to be rejoined by a previous co-host. Welcome, Mary O'Callaghan.
Hello, Stuart. Thank you so much for having me back. It's very exciting.
That's okay. It's really good to have you back. You did a great job last time, and there are a couple of reasons I was keen to get you back actually, because the interview we've got today is a little bit about different ways of working, and I was keen to get someone from a larger charity to listen to it and reflect with me at the end. But before we go into that, I was also keen because I read some really interesting things over the last few days all around a study that was done all around using AI to predict the likelihood of heart attacks. And it was based on a paper that was in the Lancet. And I figured that you might know a little bit more about this than I did. And I was curious if you could tell us a little bit about it.
Absolutely, Stuart. I'm really glad you saw that information. I mean, this paper that's been launched is one of the reasons that, I'm so proud to work somewhere like the British Heart Foundation. So basically, we funded some research in Oxford looking at how we could use AI to make our tools more effective at predicting if somebody was at risk of a heart attack or a cardiovascular problem. And quite often people come in are assessed for these problems, and using current technologies, they might be sent home with some false reassurance that they don't have any issues, when in fact there might be something lying ahead for them that we could have predicted in advance. Using AI, we're able to find out that 45% of cases, clinicians decided to change the treatment in view of the outcomes from the AI analysis. So that means that in 45% of cases, people are receiving were able to receive the treatment that they needed. So this is like super exactly what I think AI is going to be great at, is helping clinicians to make more informed and more effective decisions for their patients. And now the NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, is evaluating rolling this out across the UK. So it's going to be hopefully quite a speedy transition from, research into action that will improve outcomes for patients. So that's the kind of thing that's super exciting about AI.
That's really amazing, and so what I think is good there is that this is something which has been funded, which is the study has now happened. You've got a lot of evidence, and now actually something is able to roll out. I'm guessing that it's not about AI just making all these decisions on its own and then taking actions. It's about a clinician having AI really as a digital assistant, something which helps a clinician make decisions, which is how you handle the risks around this very carefully, because you've still always kept that clinician in the driving seat.
Absolutely. I think there's no way of removing the expertise of a clinician. What we're trying to do is to give people more information to make better decisions, which is, what I try to do in work about technology decisions, and what the BHF is all about in terms of its research. It's helping people to make better decisions because we've got the very best information and knowledge.
Wow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link to a couple of articles about that in the newsletter there so people can have a read, because it's a really fascinating study, and it really shows, I think, how AI is actually practically making a difference. So it's one of the best we've got so far. Um, Mary, I'm hoping you're going to stick around because I'm going to play this interview next, and maybe afterwards we can have a quick chat about that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Stuart.
Hello, today I'm joined by Sanjay Lobo, who is the chief exec of OnHand, a small organization that is working with volunteers and has got an interesting model. Sanjay, welcome.
Hi there, Stuart. Really, really nice to be on the show. Thanks for the invite.
That's okay, and I'm really pleased. I've had quite a few episodes where I've had people from some of the larger charities and a couple with smaller charities. But I'm interested to talk to different types of organisations that are doing good in different ways. And your organisation really caught my eye because you've been doing some really interesting things, particularly with volunteers over the last 2 or 3 years. Could you just tell us a little bit about it for those who
Yeah,
don't know about On Hand?
Yeah, of course. So OnHand, we were set up in 2019. I've got the title of founder and CEO, but it wasn't my idea. It was actually the idea of a whole bunch of very large charities back in 2018. So you get the idea. To 12 very large charities who came together with a consultancy called Good Innovation, who typically work with charities on, I guess, new ideas for revenue streams. And a bunch of innovation teams at those large charities got together to hash out new ideas. And one of the ideas was, what if we could use technology in a very different way to solve social issues, like the care crisis? And the idea was, well, what if we could use a mobile app just in the same way you use Deliveroo to find your takeaway tonight? Well, what if we could use technology in the same way, but you're not looking for a takeaway, you're looking for an opportunity to volunteer. So it was on demand, based on your exact location. Um, do it when you want. Don't have the pressure of having to come back every week. All the things that were slightly broken, well, not slightly, are really broken with the volunteering system today that works in traditional charities. So it was the innovation teams trying to take apart some of the things that hold back volunteers today.
I want to dive straight in with a question around that, because one of the things that traditional charities have spent a lot of time looking at is the combination between technology and the process and the ways of working and the people involved in it. And just on the face of it, you're sort of putting forward that actually we got this great app, which makes it sound quite straightforward. Is there more to it? Is there a whole load of stuff around people and process and how it works?
There is, but I guess the idea itself is really simple, and we try and make everything else that flows behind that really simple. Of course, it's complex, right? So on the one hand, you've got to find people to help or charities to help, and so you've got to have a way of recruiting them. You've got to have a way of safeguarding them, and then you've got to have a way of them showing up on the app for a volunteer to find. And you on the other side of that, who are these volunteers, and how do you make sure that they are the appropriate people to be, helping someone in need? And the idea again was started in social care. So we're talking about vulnerable people. So how do you ensure the safety of the vulnerable people by vetting those volunteers? So there's a whole range of complexity that goes in around that. But still, the idea was, hey, a volunteer or a person in a local area anywhere in the UK could pick up the app, and in exactly the same way they'd use Deliveroo, they could browse for an opportunity to do good, accept it, and then another massive key difference: not connect with the charity, not connect with the charity, and connect with the person who needed the help directly. So literally right now, if I look on the app and I want to go and help someone locally, perhaps they need their shopping done, perhaps they need something taken to their post office and they can't do it themselves, I could go and volunteer right now, cutting out the traditional charity who's been in the middle, I guess, vetting and tracking all of that activity. We're using technology to connect them, so it's on demand, and we're also doing the vetting at the same time.
And that's really the holy grail that charities have been trying to trying to get to, where you've directly connected the supporter, the person who really has the motivation to be doing good, with the beneficiary. And that's really where it's a lot more powerful, where you've got people giving time rather than giving money.
Yeah,
And
totally that. But it involves, and I think the when throughout this journey we've been on, occasionally we've talked to a larger charity about it, and you can just see the barriers for them to get to that model you just described as the holy grail is really difficult. So they have to take apart everything they've learned so far or put in place for safeguarding. They have to take it all apart and start again. That's very, very, and that's very, very difficult for a large charity.
and in terms of scale, so it's how you mentioned, I think it was around 2018 that the idea first started. How big has it got? How many volunteers, or have you got any numbers associated with it?
Yeah, so we went live in 24th of February 2019 was the first person we helped, and probably worth explaining. Hey, those charities got to a certain place in 2018, working with the consultancy, where they had they figure out that they could acquire volunteers via Facebook ads really, really cost effectively. You could get someone to sign up, download for, I think it was 6p. It was something very, very low cost, but you could acquire this volunteer for 6p. And that was, when I saw that start, I thought there must be a way to monetize that. And the charity's monetization was essentially, hey, we're going to provide the volunteers to people in need, instead of using And, a professional carer for really basic stuff. You don't need a professional carer who might cost £20 an hour to get you shopping. Local volunteer could do that. But how about we still charge the person who needs that help, but a lot less than the professional carer? And that was the revenue model, essentially, with money going directly to the charities and the platform OnHand keeping a platform commission, £2 out of £10 type of thing. And so we started in 2019. Customer number one was my dad, and that's why I got involved. And that year we went on to, I think, help hundreds of people. And the ambition in that year one was just to get to 100 people we could help. And as you know, because you're from the charity world, hey, the need levels out there are dire. So we hit that target of getting to 100 people to help within the first 3 months. So it was like, okay, we're not going to face barriers to recruiting volunteers. We'd already recruited 2,000 before starting, without really trying. And we hit the 100 people to help within a couple of months. So it was, okay, we're not going to face barriers on either side. This could be a high growth technology business, which is the background I'm from. We should go and get capital to really put the foot down. And so we went and raised money. We flipped the model in 2020. 2020, of course, COVID year. That model we had of, helping elderly adults, charging them for the help they got, but a lot less than professional carers. That model was broken as soon as COVID hit. We were literally charging the most vulnerable person on the planet, an elderly person who was self-isolating. So that's wrong. We stopped charging them and didn't really know how we'd make money. The luck that we had was the bit I mentioned before. We had gone and raised money. And so at the end of 2019, we'd done an angels round. Actually, we did two in 2019 because it grew so quick. And that let us have cushion to figure out how we'd monetize. Long way of answering your question, by the way, but hopefully it's interesting. But that moment in COVID, when we weren't sure how we'd make money, it became clearer to us because businesses started coming to us. Businesses started coming to us saying, hey, we've just made all of our employees go and work from home. They've spread across the country. We need a way to engage them, and we'd love to get them engaged in their local communities. We think your app can help because you can connect them with someone local who needs help, right? And as soon as that kind of query came in, that was the light bulb moment for us to say, hey, we can charge the businesses for that. The people who need help still get it, and they're delighted we don't charge them anymore. And the volunteers, the employees, are also delighted because we're going to make volunteering so much easier than has ever existed before. And the companies have paid for it all. So it's this lovely virtuous circle. I'm getting back to your question on the size. So in that year, we signed up, I think, just 10 corporates. The year after, we signed up like 100 corporates. At this point, we're into the hundreds of corporates working with us. Over 1 million actions got completed on the platform last year. We have tens of thousands of charities and missions available for employees on the app at this point. And probably revenue is interesting for the charities to hear about. This could have been a project done by charities. At this point, we'll become a multi-million-pound business this year. And again, it could have been done as an innovation within a charity, and it was a charity innovation team idea.
So I really like that model because from the charity world where I come from, talking all about the monetization and the creation of a sustainable business model, there's less discussion around that. And what you're describing there is your constant focus, because you were a startup organization, you were trying to work out a startup company, you were trying to work out how can I make this sustainable. That there was a very clear focus that you had to understand, how is this going to monetize itself? Can I look to the volunteers? Can I look to the corporates? How can I turn this into something which isn't just going to be a nice idea which rumbles along for a bit trying to get people to fund it? It's actually going to be something that's self-funding, self-sustaining as a model, which means, of course, that it then becomes embedded and it becomes long-term. It doesn't just become something that works for 6 months or a year or 2 years. It's actually a long-term brand new model you've come up with, which sounds really, really great. And it sounds like there's a lot of lessons can be learned from that.
Yeah, thank you. And you're exactly right. I get asked a lot about to present about startups and impact startups in particular. And in all of those discussions, I'm always asked about how do we set it up to be impactful, and what are the first things you should do. And I always turn the conversation back to, actually, no, think of yourself as just like any other startup. The number one thing you've got to do is survive. Great if you do some good and you go, but you go out of business next year. That's meaningless. You've got to survive. So don't view yourself as a different impact tech for good thing. View yourself as a business that needs to survive and be here next year and the year after, and then worry about how you're going to have dramatic impact.
And have you been involved in any hackathons? I'm just thinking as I'm hearing this, the idea of think like a startup. So I myself have run 2 or 3 hackathons where I've done this with technology teams within charities, where we try and do this. Think like a startup. Try and break the mold of thinking that we've got into within our charity, and try and do it in a different way.
It sounds really interesting, and I guess I'll be brutally honest. In the whole conversation around surviving, we get asked to do lots of things, and I'll reject the vast majority of them. And I'll be honest, I guess it's because I'm 48. I think if I'd done this within my 20s, I'd have followed every single invite that we'd had, right? Because it's all exciting, going and visiting a big organization and getting them involved in various bits that we need to do. But ultimately, the day-to-day job still, and we're almost 5 years in, is how do we make enough money to be here next year and the year after? And we're just about break even. We will be in the next 12 months, and that's great. But hey, we're 5, 6 years in, so survival number one by a long way. And then, like any startup, there are so many distractions, and a hackathon with a charity could be a great idea. But identifying the ones that are actually going to be beneficial for us or lead to more revenue or whatever, that's really hard.
I'm really interested in your way of thinking about this, because it's a very different mindset to within many of the places where I've worked, and the organizations I worked alongside, because you're very clear. I need to make sure I'm focused on what's the overall mission I'm trying to do here. If something's a nice thing to do, but does it contribute to the overall cause? Because obviously there's a very clear thing you're trying to do, and if you're focused on that, you can create something really really amazing and sustainable. But the more distractions you get along the way, presumably, the more it takes away from the core goal
Absolutely.
you're trying to get to.
And there's probably some honesty here on like the background I come from. I come from a very commercial background. I've worked in high tech growth companies, commercial companies for the last 20 years. Lastminute.com was one back in the noughties, and then Vistaprint was a really high growth company, US company, Nasdaq listed, all of that stuff. Became global, 17 million customers. But you think about the metrics so much and the focus part. I'm not from that charity background, which may have may well be coming out in the leaning I have here for like singular focus on how we survive and money making. But what it leads to, I mean, the point I made slightly earlier is if you can get past that first few years and get a decent run, 1.2 million actions were completed on the platform last year. So if your idea on impact's good enough and you can survive long enough, it's going to become an incredibly impactful thing. Other great examples, someone like Olio, the food waste sharing app. I don't think they were from charity backgrounds either. But again, it's a commercial business, but it's now global with ridiculous amounts, millions of users. Sharing food or sharing other goods. It's a different type of impact on the world. Tech for good, for sure, but in the commercial space.
Yeah, you mentioned in there, you mentioned in your background, lastminute.com, which makes me think of the tech revolution that happened, the dot-com boom 20 years ago, and at the moment we're in a bit of an AI boom. And I've discussed with a few people how the similarities that you went through. I don't know, late 90s, the World Wide Web came along, and then there was a dot-com boom based upon the new technology breakthroughs. And similarly, in the discoveries around Gen AI, the sort of the innovation around Gen AI in the last 18 months of ChatGPT and a variety of other things, and the subsequent AI technology boom that we're expecting, which is happening, and the growth that I'm imagining, there'll be large growth of small companies doing interesting things. First of all, I'm interested if you've got any thoughts on that, and secondly, if at OnHand you've been looking at any AI elements.
Yeah, definitely. So, there's no getting away from AI. AI is going to be ginormous, and every indicator says it will be. Every leading speaker says it will be. For OnHand, I think there's some immediate applications, and immediate being in the next 12 months probably, and those feel like in customer service. It feels like AI will be able to help us route things, answer things in a much faster, probably real time basis, and that's really near term. It may well be it can do that already. A secondary place, I think, is we're essentially a B2B business, right? We sell and talk to corporates all the time. They pay for our service. and make the platform available to their employees. But how do we acquire those companies? I think AI could play a great role in the initial conversations with acquiring a company. So identifying them, potentially even sending them messages before we start speaking to them. So those are two, I think, immediate. And then longer term, tech team is very much looking at AI applications in its own development and code making. They're not sure yet, but I think a breakthrough will happen, I think, over the next 12, 24 months, where it becomes more ingrained in our tech team as well.
Okay, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I've spoken a bit with larger charities around their approach to AI, which has a lot to do with having policies to manage risk, having policies to make sure that they're getting engagement across the organization, but also making sure that they've got engagement at board, trustee level, having strategic roadmaps to try and understand how the benefit from AI can be aligned with the overall organizational mission. There's a lot of thought of sort of the big elements there. And I'm curious, you're in a very different type of organization. What does that approach sound like to your organizer, to you and your organization? And what sort of approach would you be looking at?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So there's another example in our organization where there's human touch, and that is we talked a little bit about safeguarding earlier and risk, and you just mentioned a few areas of risk there. One of the human touch areas we have is on DBS checks, right? So we do DBS checks via the platform. You can submit your documents via the platform, but a human will always check those before they're submitted, and that's the law. That's the way it's got to be. AI could probably do that better than the human. The human makes mistakes. So is there a place for AI there? Maybe. I think always from starting, it's felt like I've worked in high growth tech before, but what we do, because it involves so many human aspects, it feels like it will always be a tech with a human touch solution. I don't know. I can't think or see far enough forward where the person in our team who's responsible for calling individuals in need, ensuring that they want the help because they've been referred by a GP or whatever, that they're suitable for a corporate non-trained volunteer to turn up, and that there aren't any other safeguarding risks around their house. Is there a future where AI can do that? Yeah, I guess you never say never, but it feels like there's a great scope for risk, or maybe there isn't. Could AI do it better than a human who is prone to human error? I don't know the answer, but it is a fascinating topic.
Yeah, it is, and I think a lot of the examples I've seen have been around AI digital assistants, where you've got a staff member doing a job, and they are just assisted by an AI assistant who's helping them making judgment calls, which is in a similar way to you might have a junior staff member assisted by a senior staff member who, and that's how they're making their judgment calls. It's just using an AI assistant, which can be more cost effective and you can work at greater scale.
Yeah, it sounds great, and it takes out the human error risk. So yeah, I like that.
Yeah, great. Well, Sanjay, I don't know if there's anything else you want to discuss with us all about OnHand, or if there's anything I haven't touched on. But for me, that's been really insightful. I've got quite a lot from that.
Yeah, I guess like the opportunity here, I guess the audience is charities, and I guess I throw out a challenge to the charities. So on hand, arguably a successful idea from charities that's now, I guess, in the private space, on the way to multiple millions in revenue. Hey, will probably keep growing at a decent click. It could have been a charity innovation. We could be a charity. We could be part of a charity. And what stopped it was the innovation teams from those large charities that got us going. They took us to a certain level, which was the idea, and proving out that they could acquire volunteers. But then they had to stop, and they had to stop because the next step would have been going to help someone like my dad. And the barriers those innovation teams immediately faced were, well, how are we going to get this past our trustees, right? You have to go up and say, we're going to take this risk where we're going to connect effectively a stranger, we DBS check them, but effectively a stranger we don't really know, to someone's elderly relative, potentially in a vulnerable scenario, and we're just going to let them connect and off they go. And of course, that is a scenario which most charities, or most large charities with any safeguarding, would just say no to. So Would they be able to go and change someone's light bulb? No. Will they be able to go up a ladder? No. Will they just be able to go and meet up? Probably no, is the answer from most charities. And I get that. That's part of the safeguarding risks that are in place. Even still, I guess I'd challenge, we are now doing millions of actions every year. I think the NHS Responder app showed that you can do this type of stuff at scale and with limited risk. And so the challenge I want to throw out to charities is what's the risk appetite, and can some of what's happened in the last 5 years, including something like OnHand, but definitely including the NHS Responder app and the volumes they did, change the risk perspective and change the way charities look at what they're able to do or not. And then the second challenge, so that's the first challenge, look at risk. The second challenge is, are charities up for breaking the system they've created? And what do I mean by that? I mean, there are so many ways of doing things that are just ingrained and would need breaking to do it in a much different way that may be, and not definitely, but maybe a lot better and more impactful. And but what's interesting about that is one of the questions that we repeatedly get is, how will we accommodate all of the existing systems and technology that's already out there? And that's exactly where I think charities will fall down, because instead of trying to think of a scenario and a solution that's going to be the most impactful, one of the starting places is what exists already and how do we make sure we continue integrating with that stuff that already exists. And what that does is just continue the historic position of how we volunteer versus a new world where you acquire so many more volunteers and you enable them to get so much more done. And so that's the second challenge. Are charities willing to break some of the stuff they've set up already to actually get to a better place?
Wow, I like that. I love that in my podcast when people lay down challenges. There was an episode from Karen from the Race Equality Foundation where she laid down a challenge to the tech sector and to the charity sector. And now in this episode, we've got one which is really around: are they willing to change their risk appetite, and are they able to break the existing model and way of working to try and find a new way of working? I think the first one is more of a challenge. The second one, I would say, the charity sector, in my view, is not some amorphous blob. There are all sorts of elements within the sector, and it moves in different ways. And I think there are definitely a large number of elements within the sector that really are up for that, breaking the existing model. I think people are very reflective within the sector. People, I don't know, we talk a lot, we get into in-depth discussions, and we do realize many of the drawbacks of the models we put in place and spend a lot of time. But then there's a problem all around taking risk and investing to actually deliver that change, which is quite often where it falls down. But really, I'm taking that challenge and putting out there. I'd be interested if people want to get back to me, and I can connect them with Sanjay, and we can start a conversation. But I'd be really interested in any feedback anyone wants to give me on that. I know I have a few senior charity execs who listen in on this podcast, so please do drop me a line and we'll have a chat.
Yeah, I'd love that. So if there are charities listening to those challenges and they're thinking, well, no, I want to be doing something about that, and we are doing something about that, I'd love to have that conversation. Totally love that, Stuart.
Yeah, and I think also that it might also be at the trustee level. I think trustees have more freedom because they're freed from the day-to-day challenges of running the charity, but they're looking at the bigger picture, and often are involved with multiple organisations, so can see it from multiple angles. So again, that's an area. Trustees, I think, who are listening in on this, again, open to a conversation. Fantastic. Well, Sanjay, this has been really, really interesting chatting to you today, and I've absolutely loved seeing something from a slightly different angle. And I'm definitely going to make sure I get a few other guests who are coming from different angles like this, because it adds a lot of colour to the whole argument and the whole challenge around charities and AI and technology. It's been brilliant having you on today, Sanjay. Thank you very much, and I look forward to chatting more with you. Hopefully, if we get anywhere with our challenges.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the invite, Stuart, and we'll speak soon.
So welcome back. Now, I recorded that interview a few days ago, and it was actually during volunteering week I recorded it. I was hoping I was going to get it out for the episode during volunteering week, but there's always a little bit of editing and pushing things around. So it's actually this week's episode. It was really interesting talking to Sanjay because he's very passionate about what he's doing, and he was clear with an entrepreneurial mindset. When I was speaking to him, I could tell that he was very clear in how he was trying to make a difference, but make a difference in a way that was very sustainable in the longer term through a entrepreneurial organization. And when he talked about there were two challenges he laid down towards the end. One was all around how big charities can struggle because of the large risks they face, because of their reputation, because of the beneficiaries they're working with. Often they have a lot of risk factors which they have to balance. And then secondly, he was talking a little bit about the challenges which all large organizations have around their existing systems, their existing ways of working, which sometimes can hold them back. And as a startup, he's been able to move ahead very quickly in an agile manner, not being held back by legacy technologies and systems, which is really interesting. His challenge there was to see if larger charities consider breaking up any of their existing models. So I was keen to chat a little bit with Mary, who works in a larger charity, much as I worked in a larger charities. It sounds easy when Sanjay says it like that. Do you think it really is that easy?
Thanks, Stuart. And yeah, it was really interesting hearing Sanjay talk about that. And I do recognize that contrast between wanting to do things really quickly, wanting to test things out and learn from them rapidly, and the fact that we have some might say slow moving decision making processes. And I think some of it is just about understanding the risk. Yeah, if we think about volunteering, we work with up to 18,000 volunteers at any one time, and we have to really be sure that we're keeping them safe and secure and that we're protecting them so that we don't put any of their data or anything else at risk. So that does mean that sometimes we can be very cautious around how we work with our volunteers or with our people. So I don't think it's necessarily about the old legacy tech that's the issue. I mean, that's part of it. It's about how can we get faster at making decisions and really understanding the risks that we have. And we've done some work. We have some innovation teams that are now starting to work more sometimes independently, and that's a really interesting model. Is innovation something that should be independent, or is it something that should be kind of built into the core of what you do? And at the moment we're trying to do innovation with some teams bedded in with their colleagues. But I think we'd have to keep coming back to safety. It's like we were talking at the beginning about the trial of the AI software to predict the risk of heart attacks. NICE are going to be evaluating that for safety. We can't put things out into the real world if they're going to put people at more risk. So, I take the challenge on board about being less risk averse, but at the same time, we have some pretty hefty risks that we have to deal with. I'm sitting on the fence. I don't think that helps you.
Yeah. No, that's how I always answer questions as well, sitting on the fence. But I'm thinking about what you're saying there. Faster and better decision making. I can't disagree with that at all. But the heart of faster and better decision making is data. It's about having really good data. I mean, that study from the Lancet we talked about before, that was based on 40,000 cases there. There was a large data set there. And one of the things that I've noticed about faster and better decision making is decision making becomes a lot easier when you've got really good data to make a very good case. And I think that's where we can benefit quite a bit. I know that when you're in a smaller organization, you'll have smaller data sets, and therefore you will be able to get quicker decisions from those. But in a larger charity where you have much larger data sets, it's really important that you're able to carefully segment that data and understand the bits of data that you're looking at to get to the right decisions. It's a big topic, and I think I need to have another podcast where I delve a little bit into the data behind technology and the data behind AI. So just one other thing he mentioned in terms of risk was he talked a little bit about obviously they do the DBS checks on their volunteers, but he talked a little bit about the risks that charities would worry about volunteers, and I know from my history of working in charities that is a risk, and that but you have a good set of policies around how you work with volunteers. And I'm not necessarily sure that slows you down. It's as long as you have those clear policies and a clear understanding what you can and you can't do and what the organization can safely do, it can be quite agile.
I think so. Yeah, I think where we move slowly in life is where people don't really know what their role is, what their responsibility is, and what they have to do. So if we can make it really clear for colleagues and teams, this is what you do in X or Y scenario, then they can move more quickly because they feel kind of safe to make a decision because the boundaries are there. So I think it is about feeling safe. And I think that some of the tech and the data and maybe even the AI will be able to help with that, with generating those scenarios, with giving that insight to our teams to say, oh, in this kind of situation, if you get this question, here are some sources of information, here's what we've done before, making that more speedy. So yeah, I think we have to be cautious, but maybe what we can do is see if technology can help us to help people more quickly.
I like that. That's really good. Clarity around what you're doing, clarity around your data, good analysis there. I think that's a really good place to finish up here. I'd really like to hear your feedback as well, because I think a lot of people have listened to that and they will probably, some of you might be talking back at at your headphones or your radio, whatever you're listening to it on. And I'd love to hear what you want to say, because we can feature that in future episodes. So thank you very much, Mary. It's been really, really interesting having you back on again. And I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you enjoyed listening to the interview with Sanjay.
Thank you. Yeah, Stuart, it's been great. Always interesting questions and interesting things to think about. So yeah, curious to hear what the rest of the audience has to say.
All right, brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Coming up next week, we've got an interview with another interesting smaller organization, which is a social enterprise based, but this time it's going to be based in East Africa. And so we're looking at international development contexts. That'll be interesting. So please stay tuned for that next week. And once again, thank you, Mary, and goodbye.
Bye, Stuart.